Welcome to Kahani Bar, a cocktail of stories in English and in Hindustani. I am Payal, and today's story is The Skylight Room by O. Henry. First, Mrs. Parker would show you the double parlors. You would not dare to interrupt her description of their advantages and of the merits of the gentleman who occupied them last. He was a manufacturer of leather findings, something certainly in the leather line. He left on the first of the month. And as Mrs. Parker spoke, you could see in your mind's eye his big sample cases and trunks piled up on the floor. Then you would pass on to view the second floor front at $8 per week, where a married couple had lived for 3 years. The husband was a truck driver for a department store. There was a claw-footed mahogany bed in this room and a brown plush rocking chair. After that, you might see the third floor back at $7, occupied by a single gentleman who was in the Excelsior business. Excelsior is shavings, that are packed around bottles and glassware. He occupied the room for 4 years. Then you would be shown the fourth floor front, which would be described to you as being rented to a gentleman in the flower business. The room was indeed light and airy, and there was a fine view from the window of the elevated railroad and of the rear of the house across the street. At last, you would be taken to the fifth floor and into the Skylight Room. It was plainly to be seen that Mrs. Parker took a special pride in this room. She would stand by the door and wave her hand towards its 4 bare walls. "It's small," she would say, "but you can see the sky. Every room in the house ain't got that advantage. Look at the skylight, all light and ventilation. You don't get that everywhere. It might do for you. $8? Sweet-faced Miss Leeson, the 20-year-old typist, looked at the little room. The big skylight showed a square of blue sky. The walls were clean. The room held a narrow iron bed, a washstand, and a chair. That was all. But she smiled. "I'll take it," she said cheerfully. And so she moved in with her typewriter and her few clothes and her bright laugh that somehow made the other boarders feel that perhaps life wasn't so dull after all. The boarders were a mixed lot: clerks, salesmen, a school teacher, an artist, and one or two who did nothing in particular. In the evenings, they gathered in the parlor downstairs where Mrs. Parker's piano stood open. Miss Leeson would often be there, her hands folded on her lap, listening and smiling, though she rarely said much. One evening, as they sat together, she went to the window and looked up. "There's my star," she said, pointing toward the narrow patch of sky above the roofs. "I call it Billy Jackson." They laughed good-naturedly, though some a little sneeringly. "Why Billy Jackson?" asked one. "Oh, I don't know," she said lightly. "Just because, well, it looks like a good, kind sort of star, doesn't it? And Billy Jackson sounds friendly." After that, whenever the boarders met in the evenings, they joked about Miss Leeson's star. If she seemed a little tired or pale from long hours of typing, someone would say, "Better go and tell Billy Jackson your troubles." She would smile and take the joke in good part. But the work grew harder to find. There came days when she tramped from office to office, hunting for a place. Her shoes wore thin, and sometimes she came home without having eaten. Yet she always smiled and always looked up through her skylight before going to bed. One night she came home later than usual. She climbed the long flights of stairs slowly. Her little room seemed very hot and close, though the starlight was open. She lay down on the narrow bed without lighting the lamp. It grew darker. The street noises faded. Through the skylight shone her star, bright, steady, friendly Billy Jackson. "Good night, Billy Jackson," she whispered. The next morning, Mrs. Parker knocked at the door and got no answer. She called, then opened it and looked in. Miss Leeson lay very still on the bed, her face white, her hands folded. Mrs. Parker screamed for help. The doctor came, shaking his head. "Starved," he said briefly. "No food for 3 days." They sent for the ambulance, and soon 2 young men in white came with a stretcher. "What name?" asked one, taking out his pencil. "Miss Leeson," said Mrs. Parker. "She's a typist. She lived in the Skylight Room." The young man looked around, then up through the skylight. "Billy Jackson!" he called to his partner, who was waiting by the ambulance below. "Bring it up here!" The other man came quickly up the stairs. He too wore the white uniform. On the breast of his coat was stitched in red letters, "Billy Jackson." Now, for those of you listening in, that's what I call a miracle of faith, especially for the lonely-hearted who found solace in a star. Maybe it was a sign from the universe or the starlight to always be hopeful. And on that blissful note, this is Payal signing off. Take good care of yourselves until we meet again for the next story.